International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor is hosting U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who will be launching his country's sub-Saharan Africa strategy. Blinken's visit comes at a time of heightened geopolitical tensions, and South Africa having taken a neutral stance when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Let's take you to the offices of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. That's where we find Ziyanda Ngcobo to give us a preview of what to expect. If the program is anything to go by, Ziyanda, in about, 3 minutes' time, Antony Blinken should be stepping inside those doors?
Absolutely, Dudu, and it's going to be quite a historic moment. Of course, it's going to be the first time that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken makes a visit to South Africa in that role after taking that position late last year. A very significant moment given South Africa's neutrality when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and plenty to talk about given the rising geopolitical tensions across the world and the superpowers really scrambling for the attention of Africa, if I could put it that way. Russia having visited, parts of the continent earlier on this year, Sergei Zvarov being one of those to come to the continent, as well as French President Emmanuel Macron also coming to visit, certain countries on the continent. So yesterday, Blinken arriving, heading to the Hector Peterson Museum as one of his first stops, really also commemorating then the 1976 generation, and then certainly today a very significant moment meeting with our International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor, where it's expected then there's probably going to be an expectation from South Africa to take a much stronger stance when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but also there's going to be a lot to manage given the the fallout from the U.S. speaker visiting Taiwan just last week, and how China reacted to that. And you'll know South Africa forms part of BRICS, and it will be interesting to see then how our tone and our language will be now that we have the Secretary of State in the country to discuss these issues.
Absolutely. Just a few moments ago, we saw some men in suits and earpieces, and one would assume that's the security personnel possibly doing a sweep of the building.
Yes, absolutely. So it's all systems go, for this visit. And if we can just delve a bit more into the contents of this visit, when you look at the trade relations between U.S. and South Africa, we're like 39th in terms of trade relations for the U.S. So we're quite a significant country when it comes to trade, but also the African continent really being one that is going to be of significance. In fact, Antony Blinken is going to be launching the U.S.'s sub-Saharan Africa strategy for the United States. And really the aim, it would seem, would be to try and contain the influence of countries in particular, such as Russia and China, on the African continent. Blinken will also then, after this visit, he'll leave tomorrow and head to Rwanda and also go to the DRC, where a lot of the focus there will be on the violence of the eastern parts of the Congo, where we know that the M23 rebels, which was named after, of course, that peace accord which fell through in March 23, 2009. It's going to be key because of a report that was recently released then by the UN Security Council regarding the conflict in the DRC, where they believe and they have found evidence, they say, of Rwanda funding then those insurgent rebels in the eastern parts of the Congo, the M23 rebels. And so any moment now I've just seen some kind of a signal that those inside the building will need to stand by. And just to take you through what's going to be happening, so Antony Blinken will be arriving where I'm standing, right at the doors of the Durko building, and then he will walk straight inside the building, where you will see the South African flag obviously flanked right next to that of the United States, and he'll walk straight up to where then he will be received by International Relations Minister Naledi Dr. Naledi Pandor, who of course will also have a moment with him during lunchtime, which we will not be privy to, where they will be discussing those various issues, and thereafter there will also be a media briefing, but there will be opening remarks then from Antony Blinken, a very significant moment given the relations between South Africa and the US over the years, but how that's changed, for an example, with the formation of BRICS, which is of course part of the global south consolidating and really coming together to form a part of a geopolitical bloc, as it were. But it's very interesting that it doesn't seem like BRICS and how it was, for instance, in 2014 when it was formed, is still operating at that level. And as you look around the world at all those tensions, whether you talk about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, whether you talk about Nancy Pelosi going to Taiwan, or if you look at how, Blinken spent time in Cambodia and in the Philippines, you can tell that there's a concerted effort to boost then the foreign relations of the U.S. with the rest of the world, given the other options now that are available to countries such as South Africa.
Especially given that South Africa was of little interest, or the continent was of little interest to the Trump administration. He immediately cancelled Obama's large financial commitment to the Green Climate Fund, and we know that the climate crisis will also be on the agenda for this visit.
So climate change is key on the agenda. Trade with the U.S. is on the agenda. But even of more concern, it would seem, for the U.S., it's food security on the continent with this crisis, of course, and the shortage of grain, I should say, as a result of that conflict in Ukraine. There is a report that has come out from the UN speaking about Africa being at risk then when it comes to food security, and that Africa will suffer the most adversity when it comes to food security and being able to supply basic goods, as well as health being a critical one. You'll know that even during the COVID-19 pandemic, we received a significant amount of vaccines from Aspen at the time. I think it was about 1 million doses, if my memory serves me well, when it comes in to the relief efforts of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the relations have been they've been long-standing, but it's not the only country that has long-standing relations with South Africa. And I think, the neutrality of South Africa is going to be a sticking point. And as you've mentioned, the African continent really not really taking center stage for the Trump administration, but certainly with Joe Biden, we've seen Antony Blinken going on a drive then to resuscitate those relations. And the problem here is that maybe not the problem, but one wonders then just how much traction they'll have to regain. And this is why I'm saying a lot of what is happening now is also to contain the spread of China. We know that China, they've been dubbed as a neo-colonial power by the West in terms of how they've been funding projects across many countries, like the DRC as well, like Angola, like Rwanda, when it comes to infrastructure development, for an example. So it's also going to boil down to what can the U.S. government put on the table that will be beneficial for South Africa, but also South Africa really also giving quite a bit, to the U.S. when it comes to raw materials, especially our gold. And you remember there was even that scandal regarding, the dumping of chickens in South Africa and poultry and that impact that had with, the trade relations. So I suspect that these are all the things that are going to be put on the agenda. And of course, you'll recall that, the economic climate within which Blinken comes to visit the country is one that is of grave concern. And I recall quite distinctly during former President Jacob Zuma's, time, and at the time in America, Barack Obama was the leader of the U.S. at the time. The issue of jobs and job creation was one of the key agendas for both governments. So we know that climate change is amongst others that Blinken will be discussing, but of course there would need to be a level of prioritization when it comes to things that are important for both countries.
Do stay with Newzroom Afrika. Ziyanda Ngcobo is standing by to give us the very latest as we are waiting for Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, to make his way through those doors. Ziyanda will touch base with you in a few moments.